actually easier to say when you actually try, but
It can make people nervous.
yeah, exactly. So, Paul is an engineering manager at a web agency specializing in digital solutions for nonprofit and higher ed organizations. With nearly 20 years in the web space, he's led teams building high-impact WordPress projects with a strong focus on long-term maintainability. I don't know why I can't say that today. And smart automation. He is passionate about creating workflows that help developers move faster and ship more resilient code. So, without further ado, everybody, clap.
That's got a sales team. All right, so let's get started. I know we're behind here, but nervous on the other topics. So, unweighting quality. I'm actually, I got promotion since that bio was written, so it's basically all my fault. As an agency, we kind of have two halves of business. We have a support side and we have a build side. Can you consider that? Is that better?
Louder.
Okay. How's that? Good? Awesome. So, and as was mentioned previously, I've been doing this for a little while, and I've been with Kanopi for just over 10 years. So, at Kanopi, we aim to be a trusted partner for our clients, and part of that is being able to ship high-quality code and being able to do it effectively across the whole team. So that's not just for getting code into production, it's also for our developers to be able to spin up their projects and kind of get going. So once we prove that we can do things reliably and well, that's how we start building trust with our clients. So to do that, we need flexible tools. So the key part of this is a local development environment that can replicate any kind of production hosting scenario that we're going to get into. So, if it's Kinsa or WordPress engine, that's one thing, but also if our client has like some new Kubernetes system set up down to like a server and closet, we should be able to just replicate that setup. Then the CI/CD pipeline means we should be able to get that code and test it wherever we need to go. And all of that's maintained within the project repo. And then our delightful hosting partners. So, they are important because that's where the code goes. But in our focus on quality is kind of everything that happens before it gets to the hosting that we really care about, at least in this. So our tooling flow, we're going to go through here, is our local development setup. So we use a tool called DDEV and Composer for managing code. And then we're going to talk about source control a little bit. These are the most common ones that we use, but we're going to do everything. And then our CI/CD pipelines. So we use CircleCI a bunch, but we'll again use whatever our clients need us to use. And then our feature environments, which become a key part of our testing process. And then finally, the hosting, which, as I mentioned before, is important, but not really focused on this. But it is part of the pipeline, so we got to have that there. So, getting into it, we're going to talk about our developer tool. So, local development is always kind of a pain in the butt. Back in the day, there was MAMP and Vagrant. So we are doing Docker-based with DDEV now. And because it's Docker-based, that allows us to match any particular setup that the provider might have. So if they have Redis or Memcache or whatever, we can swap out those tools and include that in our local setup. And onboarding a developer should be quick. So if a regular developer doesn't know anything about Redis, they should still be able to spin up the project and have that there, and it should be very transparent. So when we do that, we have an init command, and that will download all the containers, download the database, and also we baked in a file proxy, so we don't have to download the uploads files for a directory as well. We can just have all the files there ready to go. So a process that can take 20 minutes just to download a big uploads directory is now down to like 5 minutes, and we've installed all the necessary tools. So we can easily refresh that production data as well. We'll have a command dev refresh that will integrate into the production environment and open up a copy of our database. And it integrates with our theme tooling. So if we have a specific version of Node, we need to compile stuff with Webpack, maybe on an older project, we're using Grunt or Gulp. That's all baked into our development tools. And then it works with our local testing tools as well. So we're going to get into Cypress a little bit. And then it's flexible as well. So if you have any other kind of tooling that you need to do, you can basically write any script to compile. Say you have a whole bunch of React apps that are part of your website. You can write a script that will compile all of that and do whatever else you need to do. So it's very flexible. Moving on to Composer, which is how we manage all our plugins in Core for our projects. So we use Core as a package. So this is how we would add Core. This guy, John Block, has helpfully made an automated system to pull in versions of Core and map it into a Composer package. It comes in very handy. And then for our free plugins, we use WP packages. And this is how we would add a plugin to the project. So the nice thing about using Composer is we're not committing any of these files to the repo, so you don't have a repo that ends up in hundreds of links. We're just creating the reference in Composer. So for premium plugins, which are a little bit trickier, Kanopi's created a private packages. So if we're working with a custom plugin that is not publicly available, we will put it into our private packages, and that's how we maintain our premium plugins. So when another update for that premium plugin comes out, we update that packages, and it'll be accessible to all projects. The other nice thing about Composer, it has commands, so you can add custom scripts, and we take heavy use of this as well. We'll get into this a little bit later. And so this is our example command for running PHPCS. We require PHPCS as a dev package. And then here you can see in this example, we're referencing our custom standards file, and we're running it against the WP content folder there. So we'll scan everything, and then if a developer wants to run that locally, they just want to Composer run PHPCS, and they can get the output. So the other part of Composer that we do is Composer patches, which is kind of like the sweet sauce for me as a sport developer, is you can also patch plugins that you deal with. So because you're just storing a reference to a version of a plugin, you can then create a patch that just works with that particular reference, and every time that plugin is updated or installed, that patch automatically gets applied back and forth. If the patch ends up not working because they've actually fixed the issue, you can go in and remove that. So the build process will fail when you have a problem with the patch, and that's another signal to the developers to start paying attention to that type of thing. So in this example, I've stored the patch file within the project, but you can actually also refer to like a GitHub diff URL or a GitLab diff URL too. So if you have a pull request on a plugin that's stored on GitHub, you can just work against your actual pull request as well. So if it ever gets merged in, you can just easily remove that too, and keep it up to date because the plugin is usable. And then updating core and plugins, because everything is in Composer, just becomes one simple command, Composer update. Composer will go and look for all the latest references and download them, and you can commit your updated composer files, and that's it. The other piece of that is the build process will take care of installing and creating all of that. We'll get into that in CircleCI. So for source control, one of the key pieces, not everybody uses it. We work with a lot of support clients here at Kanopi, and sometimes we run into clients who are like, oh, all the files are just on the server, and that's it, and that makes me very sad. So we always store code outside of the hosting platform. So one of the other reasons for this too is that clients like to switch hosting platforms pretty regularly. So if you're stuck within a hosting platform's source control, you don't get any of the extra pipeline goodness that we can add, but then you're also stuck moving that code later on if they decide to move. Pretty good. So we've standardized on GitHub, but we'll work with any common hosting platform. And our Git flow allows our development team to scale and handle different features. So we follow kind of standard Git branching process. So we'll have a feature branch, and then that will get merged back into the main. And this way our developers aren't being all working on the same single dev branch, and it gets messy. And then we also use GitHub teams to manage access to the repos. So this comes in handy. We don't allow all our developers access to all the projects in the company. So this is for security reasons. Our Drupal developers don't need to know all WordPress code. And we also have some data security requirements. So if we set GitHub teams, we can control which developers have which access to these projects. And following source control and this pipeline process, when we work with client developers, which is fairly common these days too, they can follow the same process. Everyone is working from the same source of truth, and the tools are all the same, and they run into the same issues that we do, which is wonderful. So how do we actually enforce quality? So the main thing here is with GitHub status checks. So this is a screenshot from within the GitHub branch protection page, and we are requiring these status checks passed. So I'm going to get into CircleCI here in a minute. So we have some jobs that run within CircleCI, and we're saying that these jobs have to pass on the PR before we can merge them. And also, I didn't show this, but we do make sure that all PRs need a review by someone. So, this is what it looks like with a GitHub review and status checks. And here you can see that we've got our static code checks going, but the deployment is still running, and we're still waiting for the Cypress test to run. And then when we move a little bit further along in the process, this is what it's like when all the status checks are done, and we're just waiting for the manual review from another developer on the team. So that kind of moves it out of the source control and into the CI/CD section. And here, as I was mentioning before, we typically work with CircleCI. But we can go wherever our clients need us to go. So we built a lot of tools around CircleCI to make it pretty quick. But if you need to use GitHub Actions or GitLab pipelines, we can definitely do that. And we aim to automate as many of these steps as possible. So if you have some post-deployment steps that need to happen for the client, caches need to be cleared, tokens set, or anything like that, that will all be baked into the deployment. And where possible, we aim to create reusable functionality. So the tools have different ways of doing this. CircleCI has this idea of orgs, and GitHub has GitHub Actions, and then the GitHub Actions marketplace. So both of those are open source, which is great. And CI/CD is also a great automation tool. So if you have any back-end reporting processes that need to be done, you can use your CI tool to sync and trigger those processes. So for example, at Kanopi, we have a bunch of hourly reporting that gets done as our developers work on projects. We dump all of that into BigQuery. All of that code is run and triggered through a CircleCI project. So CircleCI orgs, we've open sourced our orgs. So we have 3 orgs. The first one is CI tools. So any type of job that we're running where we need to install some packages, we've got CI tools that will install WP-CLI or run a composer command. There's kind of a suite of separate things that we can do within this org. Our deploy org is the org that we use to make sure we can deploy to whatever the hosting environment is. So it's either rsync or Git, typically, depending on what the hosting platform is. And then we have CMS updates, which I'll also get into a little bit. So this is our static test, which we run outside of our main deployment pipeline. So here, when I was showing you earlier the composer command for running PHP-CS, there's that command line there that says PHP-CS. That's the composer command that we're running. So this is how we make sure that developers who are running PHP-CS locally can get the same results that are happening in CI, because we define them in a shareable spot, and it's all running the same thing. It's not running some other tool that runs PHP-CS. So you can see we have the same sort of thing set up for vector and PHP-scan. The other nice thing about the org is when you fail, we will post that PHP-CS report back to GitHub pull request. So you can also look at it on the GitHub commit too. And then every time you push to your pull request, this runs every time. So you never don't find out about any mistakes. And then when it comes to your CI/CD pipeline, this is kind of what it looks like as a visual representation. So there are workflows that are made up of jobs, and we have a job for Cypress or Pally or a deployment, and you can see down here we've got our static tests as well. So basically our workflow is just making sure that certain jobs are hooked together and are running. One of the things you'll notice here is that we don't have anything before deployment, so that's just because of the screenshots. But normally we might have a theme compilation step because we're not committing compiled assets into the repo, because you just get a whole bunch of Git conflicts every time. So we compile that on the fly before we deploy, and usually that's a step before we have to deploy. So the key part of this is kind of moving along the stack outside of the static testing and the overall workflows is feature environments. So this is how we can get into some functional testing later on. And we don't want to be limited to just dev, test, or stage and production environments. We want to be able to create environments for every pull request. So this is really important because we can not have feature clashes as developers work on various features on the same site. So if you have a development team of 5 people, they're all messing with the homepage in some way, it's all in a shared environment, it turns into a hot mess for everybody. And it also lets the clients review the deliverables in a specific environment that isn't related to any of the work. These feature environments also allow you to upload any content, or basically a replication of production, or as close to production as you can get, with your new code added on top. And the key piece that I care about in terms of this talk is it gives us a place to run our functional tests against, because these tests are really kind of the value add in terms of what we can do for folks. So how do we get a feature environment? So it does depend on your hosting platform. You are using Pantheon. They have a baked-in product called multi-dev, so depending on your plan, you will be able to create a multi-dev through CircleCI or through the dashboard as well. And that'll let you spin up a feature environment. It's hosted on your infrastructure. It has all this tooling, so it's really great, very reliable. And then the second one for everything that is basically not is Tugboat, which is basically another Docker-based tool. So much like our local development environment Dev is basically Docker, but for local. Tugboat is basically Docker, but for the web. So you can match any kind of production environment settings that we have, and also download the database, run composer install, get the files, whatever you need to do, and then it's exposed as the public URL. So this is kind of how we build the gaps between making a testable environment for ourselves. So once we have a testable environment, this means we can move on to functional testing, which is what we really care about. Is static tests are great. You can have super clean code, no deprecation warnings, it's all great, but your website can still run like garbage, which we don't do. So one of the key functional tests that we run is Lighthouse. So going back to an earlier thing that I mentioned, we have our CI tools board. And one of those tests that we have is baked into the CI tools org. So every pull request will get a Lighthouse test run against it. And what we do is we run 3 Lighthouse tests and figure out what the best score is. And the reason we run 3 tests is the performance score is the only one that will ever fluctuate. And that's because of network and caching and how your website is actually performing. So we can dig into those with the specific reports. And the other ones there are just baseline, will always stay the same. And then you might be wondering what these scores are about. So the 90 there for performance is the score for that particular test, and then our baseline is 55. So you might be wondering where that baseline came from. Google Chrome reports back your website performance metrics every time you visit a site. And they store all this data in what they call the Chrome User Experience Report. And that is the basis for when you run a Lighthouse test. You get the core web vitals, and it tells you how well you're doing. All that data is the aggregate of all the people using Chrome. So someone else, not at Kanopi, figured out a cool way of figuring out what the 75th percentile is for all that data. So what that means in this particular context is that 75% of the websites on the internet, their score is a 55. So we want to aim for being better than 75% of the internet. So anything better than a 55 is pass. So we're doing okay on this particular pull request. Our SEO score is garbage. And part of that reason is because we're using a feature environment, which has one great add-on that's really crappy for Lighthouse, which is that it always adds a header to make it not indexable, because you don't want your feature environments to crawl like Google or anybody else. So that's a really big no in terms of Lighthouse. So developers do have to go in and take a look at the report and see if there's anything else that's going wrong there. So that's Lighthouse. It's pretty important. That's probably one of the key functional testing tools that we use at Kanopi to keep track of how to do it. So this will be integrated into every build and every support project that we work on. So another functional test that we'll add is Backstop. So this is a visual regression testing tool. And as you can see from the screenshot there, it'll highlight the differences between a reference site and what you're working with. So this is what our feature environment is built, is the test site. And we can see that some of the thumbnails have changed. And that's fine, because content changes. Nothing else is really broken there. So one of the kind of tricky things about Backstop or any other visual regression tool is you need to know when to put it into your project. So if you're working on a build project with the front end is changing all the time and your reference site is changing, or you have a developer that's like rebuilt the header 5 times, like you're just going to create a lot of testing noise for yourself. So probably don't add it at the beginning of the build project. But if you have a long-term support client, their design is very stable, you can add that and as an extra check, just to make sure you haven't broken anything in a serious way. And then the next big functional thing that we're going to get into is Cypress testing. So Cypress testing is still fairly new at Kanopi, and it's an end-to-end framework for kind of testing user flows on websites. It does a little bit more than that as well, but we use it for the end-to-end testing. And we expect our Cypress tests to run locally and against our functional environments. So our CI pipelines need to support that, as well as our local environments. Running jQuery for people who remember jQuery. And this is just an example of what that looks like. So we're getting a button in the DOM, and we're clicking that button, and it's kind of like a very simple syntax. And then another key part of Cypress, because we're aiming to build reusable components, is that we have support commands. So this is a way of doing a lot of complex operations that you have to do a bunch in a repeatable fashion. So, for example, if we need to log into WordPress, if you imagine the steps that it would take to go into WordPress, you have to go to the login page, find the form, fill in the username, fill in the password, submit, maybe check for the cookie. That's a lot of code to copy and paste across maybe 100 tests that you're maintaining. So you create that login command as a support command, and then that code is just in one spot. So we have some support commands. I will say they're mostly convert-based right now. And we have open source ours. Please take a look and submit pull requests or issues or funny jokes or gifts. I appreciate it. Yeah, so we're going to get into how that all looks in a little bit here. But as I was saying before, Cypress testing is better than static testing. Your code can be perfectly clean and your website is still not going to work in some scenarios. So when you have a donation flow, we work with a lot of nonprofits, and your donation form doesn't work, but it's not flagging in your static tests, this is a way to ensure that our donation process for the client will work with every pull request. And the nice thing too is if you have 100 tests, you can run them in parallel in CI. You run those tests in parallel, and that really helps speed up your CI process too. So if you're writing tests individually, you can test them locally individually, but if you have 100 tests, waiting 20 minutes for your test to run because you're really happy, developers get really annoying when things take a long time. So that's just a little trick that you can work into your CI technology. And we're just going to get into what a support command looks like. This one is one of the shorter support commands. So here we're just setting the title on the edit page. And you can just see we're like finding the block, and then we're clearing any text that's already in there, and we're passing our new title to it. So when it comes to sticking all this stuff together, this is what it might look like for an actual test for creating a basic blog post. So here we're defining some constants for content that we're going to create, and then we're using a bunch of these support commands that we have to go and fill out that edit page. So why this is important is you may be working on a specific feature, or you may have added a plugin, and you may be focused on testing that specific feature, but if you have a suite of Cypress tests that are going and testing the basics behind the scenes, you don't need your QA team, project manager, or some other unlucky developer that goes through and has to like click around the whole website anyway, just to make sure that anything else is not broken. We have the robots to do it for us, which I love. So here you can see we have some support commands. When you visit the edit page in WordPress, there's a million AJAX requests that get fired off. So we had to make a support command for visiting the edit page. But here we go through and we add some content. And then the key point too is it's test, so we need to validate that that content is there. So after we publish, we go and we look for that. So I've got a little video to show you what this looks like from the developer side when we do this test. So the nice thing too is every Cypress test will generate this video. So we've just logged in automatically and we're starting to fill in the content from the test that we define. So if you can imagine a PR running on our future environment and we're validating the basic functionality of WordPress is working, plus any project-specific function tests that you need to run, that donation flow, an e-commerce checkout. We can handle all of that through the Cypress. So this is really testing that whole piece. It's more than just static analysis. So these are the delightful AJAX requests that we're waiting for here. So we scroll down, and that was kind of, you can see the green check marks there at the end, and then scroll down and see the images. So that's kind of what every Cypress test should look like. And in CircleCI, you can go and you can download a video for the failed test, so the developer can see exactly where you failed in the test, and you failed. Awesome. All right, so moving on. It's my dream, because I work in support, and it's all my fault. So my dream, the guy presenting in front of me was like, I hate support. Guess what? I love support. So Kanopi does a boatload of support, actually almost 50% of support agency. And my dream, because we have about 100 active support panels on the go at any one time, is automated updates. Because who loves doing manual updates to a million WordPress sites in one go? So if we can get the robots to do it for us, even better. So before, as I was mentioning, all of this kind of builds on top of each other. Because we're running and storing our plugins and our code with Composer, and we can now run Composer Update and all of that happens for us. We go back to our CMS updates org, a few slides ago, and what that does is it'll spin up a local copy of that site, run Composer Update, and create the PR for us. So then we use our CI pipeline, which runs on the trigger. So every 2 weeks, every week, however often you want to do it. If you're really frosty, you can do it once a day. You'll spin up a PR with any updates. And if there are no updates, there's no PR. So this makes it really handy when you're managing a boatload of support to manage updates. And then the key piece is we have confidence in that update because we have all these tests running. So if we have our Cypress test running, that our donation flow is still working, then we can be confident that we just hit review, squash, merge, and deploy with the rest of the pipeline. So what that looks like, so yeah, that's my dream, which is really sad, but not gonna lie, it's true. And then what that looks like from like a CircleCI perspective is our CMS updates org here, and we're targeting WordPress. and we're pulling from the live environment for the database and we post it on Pantheon. So the org takes care of dealing with where is the data coming from, pulling the database from the correct environment. So it's down, the developer can add this, it's down to setting these few parameters. They don't have to deal with any of the like server updates, and we're just defining our update method there. So this is part of making it reusable and easily available to projects. So, what's next? Gotchas. There's always some. I'm not going to say it's all roses all the time. One of the things to look out for is you need to set up a service account for all your tools. You need an account for your local app, basically. So when I get fired for giving a bad presentation, all the projects I've set up with my keys and my access don't stop working because we set it up with our Kanopi robot account and not Paul's special account. You need to make sure you're including rotation of tokens and keys in your overall DevOps process. People come and go in an agency, and also there are security issues, and it's just kind of good security hygiene to rotate whenever you can, whatever frequency works best for your agency. Developers need to pay attention to the tests. So, I mean, I'm excited about tests. Not all the developers that work with me are excited about tests. So developers can be like, oh, this test has been failing for months. I'm not going to do that. It's always failing. And I'm like, no, that's not really why we had So kind of changing that mindset, it's like, I know it works. It's fine. It's like, again, no. So it's kind of some education depending on the background of your developers. You need to be realistic about how much you can test on a project. So our small support client, who's basically just there for updates, is not going to get a full regression testing suite with Cypress. They might start out with static tests, and as we work with them over time, we'll start adding more. It's not like from day one, you get all this cool stuff. You kind of have to have it all the time. And this stuff is really hard. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and developers want to focus on the thing that they're passionate about. So our WordPress developers want to work on WordPress. When Tugboat stops working or CircleCI is giving them issues, they're like, what's going on? So you do need to be mindful as well that carving out some time to have some people that are focused on DevOps that can go and fix those issues are really important. Because it's supposed to be an enablement for your team, and when that enablement stops being an enablement, it becomes a real big blocker, and you definitely agree with that. So, we're almost done. Recap. All of these tools here, when we set them up, are kind of built on top of each other. So our developers should be able to work on a production like copy locally and manage everything with Composer, because Composer is kind of how we manage all the code going forward, all the contributed code. And then we want to separate the tools from the final platform. So, we have CircleCI, which is separate from any deployment tool that Pantheon might have, or CircleCI or WP Engine. And that makes it all portable. So one of the principles of WordPress is that it is portable, and we need to keep our tools portable as well. There might also be some other new tool that happens to come out, and all the developers get excited about it, and so tooling like that kind of thing does happen. And once your team really gets into owning tests, it's pretty awesome. So when they are paying attention and looking at all of this, the quality of the final product gets better. And your clients can tell the difference. As things function, they work a lot better, and they can see you taking the ownership.
time, we do have room for maybe one or two questions. But, okay, we're gonna go ahead and go to the question right away. I'm assuming you're also available during
I'm available for all the chats.
Okay.
One thing I noticed is that when you're slide, the voice step is taking 27 minutes.
Sorry?
One of the slides you had with the voice step is taking 27 minutes. Is that unusual with all these testing?
No. So this is depending on the hosting platform. So that was a hosting platform that their spin up of a multi-cloud environment is quite slow. So when the infrastructure is slow, then the testing pipeline becomes slow. And there are only so many things that we can control.
One more. Okay.
Thank you so much. You mentioned a number of tests regarding the pipeline. What are the security tests? Static analysis. It's kind of performance. I'm also checking that there's no security.
Yeah, so is the question adding security analysis into Yeah, so we have not, up until very recently, picked a standard security analysis tool. So we actually just have. So it's not part of the standard CI tool, but we are going to be adding it so every project gets a security analysis done. We're going to be using a tool called and that integrates right into the GitLab repo. And one of the other things that we can do too is run a security scan against the feature environment. We have some other tools that we can do as well.
And that is going to wrap it up for the first section of day one. And coming up is the keynote. But before that, we have a half-hour coffee break. And apparently there's some Cypress talk tomorrow too. I heard word on the street is.
Yes, I will be at the Cypress talk with Cypress, so hopefully you folks will be at the Cypress talk too. And you will be coming to those things.
Okay. Otherwise, go into the after party tomorrow. Go enjoy some coffee.
Sorry, what were we doing for?
After party. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,